All right, ready to dive deep into the life and times of Genghis Khan.
Absolutely. Always up for a good historical deep dive.
You sent over this documentary outline. Should be a great roadmap. I mean, even centuries later, the name Genghis Khan still conjures up so much, doesn't
It
it?
really does, yeah. He's got that reputation, the ruthless conqueror, the warlord, but
But there's got to be more to the story, right? Like, the outline here emphasizes how much adversity he overcame.
oh, absolutely.
No formal education, exiled as a child, even enslaved for a while. That kind of stuff either breaks you or...
Or it forges something incredible.
Exactly, like talk about trial by fire.
Well, his father's poisoning by a rival tribe, that was a turning point. He was just a kid then, thrown into this world where survival meant being smart, not just strong.
So no fancy schooling, but he got a master class in Mongol politics.
Exactly. Learning how to survive by making alliances, honing those survival skills, mastering the intricacies of Mongol tribal politics.
Wow. It's all starting to sound like a really intense history lesson.
Oh, it definitely is. And one of those early alliances, critical one, was with his childhood friend Jamuka. But that relationship, well, let's just say it doesn't end well.
Oh, okay, so there's betrayal. Give me the juicy
There's a
details.
lot of drama there, yeah. Jamuka eventually betrays him, and it really highlights how fragile trust can be, even between, blood brothers, essentially. And that experience really solidifies Temujin's belief in gerontocracy. Loyalty had to be earned, not just inherited.
That makes sense. And it seems like that belief, that earn your places mentality, that really becomes the foundation for how he unites the Mongol tribes. But how does he actually get all these warring factions to, play
It
nice?
was multifaceted. Military genius, of course, we'll get into that. But he also introduced this revolutionary legal code, the Yassa. It's almost like a constitution for the newly united Mongol people. Really forward-thinking.
So while he's conquering outward, he's also creating order and accountability within.
Exactly, the Yassa. It rewarded loyalty, harshly punished any betrayal, and it set up a real framework for governance. So it wasn't just about winning battles, he was focused on nation building.
Nation building. Okay, that's impressive. And speaking of winning battles, the outline mentioned his cavalry. Incredibly fast, adaptable. And then there's this whole sophisticated spy network. It's like he was playing 4D chess while everyone else was still figuring out checkers.
He was centuries ahead, strategically, combining that traditional Mongol horsemanship with these innovative tactics and technologies. His cavalry could cover huge distances, strike with precision, and then just vanish before the enemy even knew it hit them, like a ghost army.
A ghost army. Wow. And the spy network, just how extensive was it?
It reached deep into enemy territory. They'd gather intel, sow discord among the ranks. It gave Genghis Khan this battlefield awareness that his rivals just couldn't match,
Wow. Okay, so we've got the strategic mind, the unifying legal code, the military genius, but the outline keeps pointing out he was more than just a conqueror.
right? And that's what I find so fascinating. He didn't just want to rule through fear. He was building a legacy. He was thinking long term.
Legacy building. Okay, so what are we talking about here? What kind of policies or reforms show that mindset?
Well, for one, religious tolerance, and we're talking 13th century here. This was basically unheard of. He let Buddhists, Christians, Muslims, everyone practice their faith within the empire.
That's pretty remarkable for that time period. It suggests he saw diversity as an advantage, not a weakness. Anything else, like other big innovations?
His postal system, the YAM, super efficient. Relay stations all across this massive empire, facilitating communication, the movement of goods. It was a precursor to modern communication networks in many ways.
It's like he's building the infrastructure for a globalized world. Centuries early, he's conquering, but he's also creating systems for long-term stability.
A fascinating paradox, right? And we haven't even touched on the impact he had on global trade, especially through the Silk Road.
Well, that sounds like a perfect segue into our next segment. Hold that thought.
Will do.
Okay, so back to Genghis Khan. We were about to talk about his impact on global trade, especially the Silk Road. You don't usually think of a conqueror being known for economic prosperity.
Yeah, it is kind of ironic, isn't it? But when he brought those vast Silk Road routes under Mongol control, it was like he accidentally created this perfect storm for trade and cultural exchange to explode.
So was it intentional? Like, did he have this grand plan to connect the world through trade, or did it just kind of happen as he was building his empire?
I think it was a bit of both. I mean, he wasn't dumb. He knew secure trade routes meant a wealthier, more stable empire.
Right, got to keep those taxes flowing.
Exactly. But, I think he quickly realized that fostering trade within his newly conquered lands, it was just good strategy. He was a pragmatist, adapting to new opportunities.
Okay, but how did he actually make it happen? Like, we hear about the violence, the conquering. How did he flip that and create an environment where merchants felt safe and trade could flourish?
Stability and security, that's the key. He established garrisons along the Silk Road, basically eliminating the banditry that had always been a problem. And then He standardized weights and measures.
Makes things a lot easier for everyone involved. Less room for arguments.
Right. Simplifies transactions. Less potential for disputes between merchants from different areas. It was like he was setting up a system designed to encourage trade on a massive scale.
And I think you mentioned this earlier, but the outline also mentions that he welcomed merchants from all backgrounds, cultures, religions. That's pretty impressive for a 13th century leader.
Totally. He saw the economic benefits of having a diverse group of people and basically said, come on in as long as you contribute. This led to merchants coming from as far as Europe, China, a real melting pot of goods, ideas, technologies.
So not only connecting East and West geographically, but also creating this environment for a cultural exchange. He's basically laying the groundwork for a globalized world well before its time.
Exactly. That's the Pax Mongolica, that period of stability and growth. It wasn't just about money, though. This led to this vibrant exchange of knowledge, art, religion. We see its effects in everything from the spread of gunpowder to the fusion of artistic styles across Eurasia.
It's really a remarkable legacy, especially when you consider that Genghis Khan is often portrayed as just this brutal conqueror. But speaking of legacies, I'm curious to go back to the Yassa, his legal code. We touched on it before, but I'd love to dig a little deeper into its specifics and how it actually shaped Mongol society. It seems like it went way beyond just, loyalty and punishment.
It was an incredibly detailed set of laws, covered everything you can imagine, from military organization and crime to protecting messengers, and even rules about hunting and the environment. He had a vision for a unified and well-governed society.
Wow, really comprehensive. It almost feels like he was trying to build a utopia in his own way.
In a way, yeah. And one of the core principles of the Yassa was meritocracy. Didn't matter what your social status was, your background. If you had the skills, the talent, you could climb the ladder.
So a true meritocracy. Anyone could succeed, regardless of their birthright. Pretty revolutionary for the 13th century. And I remember you mentioning that it included provisions about religious tolerance. Can you tell us more about that?
Of course. Now, Genghis Khan, he followed shamanistic beliefs, but he knew that respecting religious differences among his subjects was important. So the Yassa explicitly protected places of worship and gave people the right to practice their religion freely. Buddhist, Christian, Muslim didn't matter.
That's a pretty big deal for that time. He really seemed to understand that a harmonious society relied on respecting everyone's beliefs.
He did. But of course, we also have to talk about the downside of the Pax Mongolica.
Right, like the Black Death.
Yeah, the bubonic plague. It was devastating across Eurasia.
And how much of that spread can be attributed to the Mongol conquests with those huge trade networks?
Well, that's a tough question. Historians still debate it. The Mongol Empire's trade routes definitely helped the plague move west, but
But the plague didn't actually start within the empire itself, did it?
exactly. It came from Central Asia, so they weren't the source, more like, well,
Unintentional carriers.
yeah, I guess they could say that their conquests created all this interconnectedness, which may have sped up the transmission. Tragic, really. Even in times of prosperity, there could be unintended consequences.
It really makes you think. And it highlights how complicated it is to evaluate historical events. And figures like Genghis Khan, he was this brilliant strategist, but also a ruthless conqueror. He unified people, but he also destroyed. How do we reconcile these seemingly opposite aspects of his character, his legacy?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Historians are still grappling with it. There's no easy answer, no way to just categorize him as simply good or evil. I think the key is recognizing that history is rarely that black and white. Even the most influential figures are shaped by their time, the circumstances they were born into.
That's a good point. We can acknowledge the brutality, the conquests, but also see the impact he had on shaping the world. His story reminds us that human history is complex, with both dark and light woven together. We need to look beyond the surface and embrace the messy reality of the past.
Exactly. And to truly get to know Genghis Khan, we need to dig into his personal life, the stories that reveal who he was as a person.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You've got all these grand historical forces, these sweeping changes, but in the end, it boils down to the individual, doesn't it? What was he like, Genghis Khan, as a person behind the titles and conquests?
Well, that's where things get really interesting, because the sources about his personal life are a little thinner. But are these glimpses, these stories passed down through time that give us some clues?
Oh, I love a good story. What kind of anecdotes stand out to you? The ones that really reveal something about his character?
So there's one about a merchant who got robbed on his way to the Mongol court. When Genghis Khan heard about it, he was furious. Not just because of the theft itself, but because it threatened everything he was trying to build. That sense of safety and trust.
Well, more than just personal revenge, he was upholding the principles of his entire empire.
Exactly. He launched a full-blown investigation, and when they caught the thieves, they were executed and the stolen goods were returned. Sent a clear message, justice and security were non-negotiable. no matter who you were.
Yeah, very consistent with the Genghis Khan who created the Yassa. Big picture thinking. Are there any stories that show a different side, like a more, I don't know, gentler side?
There are stories about his generosity, especially towards people who showed him kindness or loyalty. One story tells of this young boy who offered him a cup of water on a really hot day. A simple gesture, right? But Genghis Khan, he was apparently so touched by it that he showered the boy with gifts and made sure his family was taken care of.
Wow, it's like those little moments of humanity make him even more intriguing. He's not just this distant historical figure. He had moments of compassion, connection.
Yeah. It reminds you that even the most powerful figures are still human at the end of the day. Their stories aren't just battles and empires. They're about choices, relationships, moments of kindness, and, yeah, sometimes cruelty.
Speaking of choices, let's talk about his legacy. He built this incredible empire, but empires don't last forever, right? What did he do to ensure his vision continued after he was gone?
He knew an empire built on military might alone wouldn't last. So he divided his territory among his sons, gave each one a portion to rule.
Clever. So he was trying to create a framework that would hopefully prevent his sons from turning on each other, right?
Exactly. He also set up a council of advisors to guide them. But maybe most important, he instilled in them a sense of unity. Their strength came from working together, not fighting amongst themselves.
It's like he was laying the groundwork for a dynasty, hoping his influence would stretch far beyond his own lifetime. Did it work? Did the Mongol Empire survive after his death?
Well, for a while, yeah. After Genghis Khan died in 1227, the empire actually kept expanding under his successors, reached its peak in the mid-13th century. Imagine this, from Eastern Europe all the way to the Pacific Ocean. But like all empires, eventually.
Eventually, it crumbled. Internal struggles, outside pressures, shifting power dynamics.
Yep, by the late 14th century, the Mongol Empire had split into a bunch of smaller states, each ruled by Genghis Khan's descendants. But even though it broke apart, its influence, it resonated for centuries.
So, what would you say are the most significant, lasting impacts of the Mongol Empire, the things that we still see today?
Well, for starters, their conquests, they redrew the map of Eurasia. And then the Pax Mongolica, it brought about this unprecedented exchange of goods, ideas, technologies, that flow of knowledge, culture, that had a huge impact on the development of the world, connected East and West in ways that we still feel today.
It's amazing to think that someone who lived over 800 years ago can still be so relevant to our lives today.
What do you think it is about Genghis Khan that keeps drawing us in, even after all this time?
He's just this larger-than-life figure, a symbol of ambition, resilience, and that idea that one person can change the course of history. His story has everything: humble beginnings, brilliant strategies, brutal battles, and an empire forged from pure chaos.
It's definitely a story that speaks to something deep within us, that fascination with power, with leaving your mark on the world. But there's also the complexity of his character, that blend of brutality and pragmatism, generosity and cunning.
He makes us question easy narratives, face those uncomfortable truths of history. He was shaped by his time, sure, but he also went beyond it. Left a legacy that continues to spark debate and inspire, honestly, a sense of awe. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, I think that just about wraps up our deep dive into the life and legacy of Genghis Khan. We covered a lot: his rise to power, his military innovations, the impact of the Yassa, the Pax Mongolica, and that complex legacy he left behind. But as with any deep dive, there's always more to explore.
There is, and if you're interested, I really encourage you to keep learning about this period in history and about this complex, even contradictory figure who shaped so much of it.
Exactly. And remember, history is a conversation. It's not just facts on a page. So keep asking those questions, keep exploring, keep diving deep.